Hi, I'm Mary Beth Carter, co-chair of our conference, our IAJS conference. And I have the pleasure to introduce Brian Bush, who's giving a artistic presentation entitled The Beyond Series of Photographs, Meditations on the Divine. Ryan J. Bush, Ph.D. from Aptos, California, is a fine art photographer, Reiki teacher, author of The Music of the Trees, and author of From Wandering to Illumination. He is also co-author of A Singing Wire, focusing on consciousness, awakening, and finding the sacred hidden in the mundane. His photographs are exhibited nationally and internationally. They are in numerous collections, including the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston. So it's with great honor and anticipation that I introduce you to Ryan.
Great. Thank you so much, Mary Beth. I really appreciate it. It's very nice to meet all of you, and I'm thrilled to be part of this wonderful conversation about connecting deeply with consciousness, soul, and everything that this conference is all about. Trees are some of my favorite subjects to photograph, and I've been photographing trees for about 27 years at this point. Trees have been a very important part of my own inner process, and I'm grateful to everything they have taught me. At the beginning of my presentations, I like to start by giving thanks, and for this one, I want to give thanks to the trees themselves for everything they do, not just providing beauty in our daily lives, but how they anchor us so deeply to the earth, how they stretch up to the heavens and provide this access, joining everything all together. In addition to being an artist, as Mary Beth mentioned, I'm also a Reiki teacher and practitioner. I have a Ph.D. in linguistics, and I speak, 7 or 8 languages or so. So I'm used to looking at things from many different perspectives. And it's been a really fascinating part of my journey to see how many different ways have come up for how to photograph trees over the years. So before I start showing the new series of photographs, I wanted to begin by going through my earlier series of tree photographs to give a little bit more context about how I got here and how this series overall form a progression through what we could think of as different levels of being, different levels of consciousness, different levels of the self. My first series of tree photographs was called Tree Portraits, starting in 2003. And I started by making photographs that were relatively close to how we see trees in, quote, real life. And in these photographs, we can very obviously see a tree and connect that with how we experience trees out in the world. I try to transform them to a certain extent to show a beauty that we might not otherwise notice. But in these early photographs, I really enjoy how directly we can connect with our ordinary experience of trees. Sometimes I'll focus in more deeply on them so we can see the beautiful textures and patterns and details. And there's just so much joy and beauty that has come from visiting these trees over and over again and seeing how they change. Like, for example, this tree, I tried to come back years later to photograph that same tree again, but the forest had grown out around it and I couldn't even find the original tree I photographed. So it's part of that constant process of growth and change that is so inextricably part of this world. And didn't mean to go that far. So when I'm photographing these trees, I like to go as deep as I can into whatever I'm experiencing. And the more I stayed with this series, the more I got drawn into abstract patterns, textures, and movement. And that's basically how I found my voice as an abstract artist. And gradually my photographs became more and more abstract, also influenced by music. This photograph I call Gymnopédie after the famous piano pieces by Eric Satie. And I was really moved in previous presentations, talking about how alchemists would not only be an alchemist, they would also be a poet or a musician. And so seeing how all different creative pursuits point to the same thing has been a real central part of my own journey. The more I worked with these photographs, I gradually found different ways to work with the photographs to match more of what I'm feeling on the inside when I'm taking the photograph. For example, this photograph I'm showing here was in the parking lot of the place I worked at in Silicon Valley. I worked designing speech recognition systems for a few decades. And when I photographed the tree, I was just really overcome by the immense complexity of the tree. But when I printed the photograph originally, it kind of was light gray against a dark gray background, and it didn't really have the power that I felt in the moment. So in the darkroom, I inverted the image so that whatever was white, the sky in this case was white, and that became black, whereas the tree itself took on this white and gray quality. And so it crackles with this lightning and this power that I was feeling in that moment. And that is basically foreshadowed the rest of my photographic career since then, finding ways to go more deeply into the experience of the tree rather than just how the trees look in, quote, real life. The next series of photographs I worked with, I call it Memoria. Oops, that's the wrong year up there, but it should have been from 2012 on. But gradually, I went more deeply into my own inner experience and the world of the imagination, or the mundus imaginalis, as Henri Corbin and others call it. And when I'm creating these photographs, we can see that it still looks somewhat like a tree, but to create these complex patterns and textures, I use a technique of multiple exposures, where I take multiple different photographs of the same tree from slightly different angles, with each photograph having maybe between 3 or 6 different photographs joined up with each other, all in the camera. So it's basically a kind of dance that I'm doing with a tree, where I'm moving the camera intuitively, and at the same time, I'm basically acting as my own shutter with this piece of mat board and a slit cut in it, so that I kind of am able to control exactly how long and short each exposure is to get these very complex textures. Again, trying to evoke more of our inner experience rather than just how trees look in real life. The name of the series, Memoria, came from how I was thinking about memory and how memory builds up these layers on top of each other, like a palimpsest or a piece of parchment that's been written on many, many times. As we think about something, we build up these complex patterns rather than just one simple image that is remaining unchanged. Some of the photographs are more light, some of them are more dark, because after all, life includes all kinds of experiences, not just the prototypically beautiful, but also the more challenging inner experiences, and it's all part of that overall journey. Sometimes I like to talk a lot about the photographs. Sometimes I like to just let them speak for themselves. So I'm just going to go with whatever wants to arise right now. I've talked quite extensively in my various other conference presentations, as well as in my books, about all the various aspects of these series. So anyone who's curious can look on my website or check out my books. I talk a lot about my process, how I do the photographs, and how it's been part of my inner journey. The next series of tree photographs is called Multiple Visions. And in this series, I focus more directly on the visionary experience itself. The first series I showed is closest to our level of physical reality. The next one after that is going into the world of the imagination. Now we're continuing the progression into what we could think of as visionary consciousness. The overall technique I use for this series is pretty similar to what I use for the Memoria series I showed just before, but now the photographs are in color, and I also let the image of the tree dissolve a little more, and so you might still notice some echo of the original tree, but it's kind of like a Picasso painting that you find out in the world where there are all these different perspectives joined together, or why am I blanking on the name of that famous painter that does the drip paintings? Anyway, it's like finding an abstract expressionist painting out in the world. Yes, Jackson Pollock, of course. So these photographs I take throughout the year, and it's representing an overall spectrum of consciousness going from winter to spring, summer, fall, representing the entire spectrum of our being. And here we can still see that this is in some way related to trees and plants, but it's not as obviously related to how we see trees out in our ordinary life. So I like to blur the lines between genres and have it look like they might be paintings or drawings of some kind. I like there to be mystery about how the photographs are created. But even though I've photographed most of these images 9 years ago at this point, I can still remember clear as day exactly where I photographed each one, what the moment was like, because every time I photograph these trees, it's such a numinous experience that it just indelibly etched for me. And while I'm photographing the trees, sometimes the trees will be staying perfectly still and every leaf will be very sharp and clear. Sometimes, as in this photograph, the tree is moving a little bit and there's the leaves are moving in the wind. Sometimes I might move a little bit as I'm holding the camera in place on the tripod. So it's all part of the overall process, letting go of the need for perfect crispness and clarity, letting go of that need for duality and all that, and going into the visionary experience where all those boundaries start to dissolve between us and the subject. That experience of non-duality or trans-binarity that we've been talking about. This is one of the photographs from springtime when the tree above me was just so full of bees. The smell was just utterly intoxicating. I wish there was some way to incorporate all the different senses together. In many of my exhibitions, I would have sound going as well. Maybe at some point I'll have to integrate scent as well. Who knows? The next series, the one that immediately came right before my latest one, it's called From Wandering to Illumination. And in this series, I use 3D photographs to more clearly evoke the wide range of visionary experience. And it played a very crucial role in my own awakening experiences, which I'd be happy to talk about any parts of my own personal journey and the questions if anyone's curious. And anyone who happens to have a pair of red-blue 3D glasses at home can see these photographs in 3D on my website or in my books. For now, I'm just trying to give a little sense of what the work is like. By using 3D photography, it's a way to literally allow a whole new dimension to unfold. I wanted a way to overwhelm our eye and our ordinary mind with complexity, kind of like if you're reading an immensely complex work of literature like James Joyce's Ulysses or Finnegan's Wake, or anytime we're seeing a vast landscape that's filled with complexity, it helps our ordinary mind calm down, and then we drop down into that deeper level of being that we're all talking about and hopefully familiar with. When I'm taking these photographs, I start by focusing intensely on one single twig or leaf out of the full complexity of the overall tree. So I take one photograph straight from one angle, and I turn the camera upside down, finding that same exact twig or leaf if I can, and then from one side, from another, building up between 4 or 8 different exposures to get the overall image. And then I work in Photoshop to bring it into life in that third dimension. So for me, they're really about meditations on returning to focus again and again. The first part of the series, they're bare trees in winter. And then the second half of the series, the trees have come to life in a rebirth of spring. And the series, when I present it and in my books, I think of it as a reconception of the Eleusinian mysteries from ancient Greece, where we tell the story of Demeter and as she wanders the earth looking for her daughter Persephone everywhere. And finally, Persephone is brought out of the underworld in a triumphant return to life. So for me, the series is all about the process of personal growth, transformation, awakening, whatever names we want to call for that process of connection with the deepest parts of ourselves and the oneness that we're all a part of. So that's a relatively brief overview of where I got to before I started this series. Gradually going deeper and deeper into our connection with trees, letting go of the need for things to look right exactly as they do in real life. And now in this latest series, we'll see where it goes. In this latest series, I moved the camera while taking the photograph, doing what's called a motion blur, which has the result of letting the trees dissolve from their concrete physical form and become these abstract rivers of light and meditations on the divine. So as I'm moving the camera, in this case, I was moving it from bottom to top, and we would be probably more hard-pressed to find a literal image of a tree the way we usually think of it here. I like the fact that we're letting go of that concrete representation, and now we're just entering the world of pure being, visionary consciousness, connection with transcendence and the self. It's a really fascinating process for me when someone walks past while I'm taking these photographs. In the case of this photograph here, it's a huge aspen tree with the blue sky behind it. And when I'm taking the photograph, I'll have my camera directly pointed at this tree in front of me. And when people walk past, invariably, I think I haven't had a single time when it didn't happen this way. People always ask, oh, is there a bird up there, a tree, an animal in the tree? They can't imagine that there's something to pay attention to besides what they're literally looking at. And so for me, that is the fundamental gap that I'm trying to bridge as an artist. The gap between our ordinary perspective, where we walk past a tree and we barely notice it, versus the visionary perspective when we see this radiance that suffuses absolutely everything everywhere. I really, really, really love the fact that in this series, I don't have to find one perfect, special, rare tree to photograph. Almost any tree anywhere can become breathtakingly beautiful from my perspective with this series. Like this photograph here I was at the post office, and there are these rather ordinary looking oak trees next to it. But when I stood underneath and looked up, there are these little chinks of light, these little spots of sky showing through in between all the leaves. And as I moved the camera, the blue from the sky that was showing through colored over all the the green of the tree, and all we see is this river, this flow, this ocean, which for me is, at the very heart of the visionary experience. And I just really love that any tree looks breathtakingly beautiful from this perspective, because it's not, the visionary process isn't about, one special moment or being separated from our ordinary experience. It's about embracing everything all at once. In some of the photographs, like this one, we can see that it's some kind of natural thing, whether we might think of it as grass or trees or plants. But then there is that overlay of these streaks of light that we see on top of the leaves. And again, that's little bits of the sky showing through. In some photographs, it's little bits of sunlight that are reflected on the leaves just so. And for me, those streaks of light are some of the most beautiful parts of the photographs, not just visually, but also because for me, they're reminders of that radiance that can show through anything and everything, as long as we're looking from the right perspective. Sometimes we might need the right set of tools, whether it's meditation, Reiki, active imagination, or others. So this photograph here, it's of a pretty ordinary manzanita bush, and a few of the leaves were turned just so that they caught the light. And when I move the camera, they turn into these breathtaking streaks of light. And for me, it's a lot like how any moment when we catch a glimpse beyond the ordinary perspective, those moments can become like streaks kind of shining through all the rest of our life, these unforgettable, indelible moments of connection with something so breathtakingly beautiful, words completely don't suffice. I mentioned earlier in the conference that I'm a linguist, and somebody who's paid a lot of attention to words over the years. It's a little sad that words aren't effective enough to really convey the power of the numinous experience, but that's exactly why I use photographs to try to go beyond words and get at these things that can't be conveyed through words at all. Depending on how I move the camera, and sometimes it's just a matter of how my hand happens to move. I might be trying to make a completely straight line across the photograph, but sometimes we get these little curves or swirls. And in the case of this photograph here, I was trying to make a very clear, crisp image, but it really just wanted to turn into these curving forms. And in some of the photographs, it really starts to evoke a feather or wing. When in the earlier presentation, there was a reference to this great bird. And for example, in Persian mysticism, the Conference of the Birds, there's this image of the simurg, this immensely powerful bird that each of us is a reflection of. So I like the fact that some of the photographs seem to evoke feathers or wings. This photograph here is of a small tree that had all these brown, dry leaves in it. When you see it in ordinary life, you'd walk past and wouldn't think twice about it. But when I do this motion blur, it picks up that orangish brown color from the leaves. It picks up the blue from the sky behind, the green of some evergreen trees in the distance, and it all puts it together into this, I think, just incredibly beautiful abstract painting that just came from the interaction, the dialogue the dance between me and this tree and everything around me. One of the earlier presentations talked about, I'm just trying to find the quote. It's about it's about the interpenetration between subject and object, how everything comes together into this swirl, how everything reflects everything else. So that's exactly what this series is about for me, letting go of the boundary between us and everything around us, and just celebrating that dance, these meditations on the divine. The reason I am calling the series the Beyond series is because it's trying to point beyond our ordinary way of being, pointing beyond how we live our lives the vast majority of the time, where we're so busy with work, school, friends, family, social media, all these different things. But when we drop down into that other way of being, it's so utterly different, but utterly recognizable as like we're coming home. And in our world, we desperately need ways of going beyond the ordinary. So in my own humble way, I'm trying to point to the same thing that so many other traditions from all over the world for thousands of years have been trying to point towards, but is so overlooked in our modern secular world. This was actually the very first photograph that I took in the series. I had taken my camera a few years ago, my large medium format Hasselblad that I use for most of my series. That was in the shop, and while they were working on it, I stepped outside and saw this incredibly beautiful tree with bright red, orange fall colors. And I thought, hey, what would happen if I just move my camera a little bit? And that was how the series was born, just from a chance moment when I was limited and couldn't use my ordinary camera. And that's how the beautiful serendipities of life can happen. And I love where all those things lead. I mentioned that some of the photographs evoke for me like wings and feathers. Others of the photographs, like the ones I'm showing here and after this, remind me of like curtains or veils, which of course have been very powerful images from around the world in many different contemplative and mystical traditions. And in some of my own personal experiences, visionary experiences, sometimes there does seem to be this veil between us and this other way of being, this curtain of maybe it's the boundary between our world and the beyond, or maybe it's glimpses of the net of light that some traditions talk about, that supports and surrounds and interpenetrates our world. But whatever it is, these curtains, these shafts of light that shine through, it's such a powerfully numinous process for me when I'm taking the photographs. It's a little frustrating that I can't just convey that process directly to somebody else who's looking at the tree next to me out in the world. But as soon as I show someone the photographs that I'm trying to convey, then something hopefully starts to click about what I'm trying to point towards here. For me, this photograph here is one that seems to evoke most clearly the visionary experience. Some people may, in visionary experiences, see writing on the wall, or they might see these patterns of geometric forms, or, there are countless different ways of having these experiences. But there's something very powerful for me about taking a completely ordinary dry bush, which is what this photograph is of, a very small bush that looks like millions and millions of other ones, but moving the camera in just the right way, having the right tool to go beyond our ordinary experience, it's just breathtakingly transformed into something otherworldly. And this is another photograph of a small shrub with no leaves on it, but breathtakingly beautiful for me. I feel like I end up in a very wordless place when I'm taking these photographs. So at this moment, I feel a little bit beyond words as well. So I think I just have a few more photographs in the series, but that's where it's taking me to. I wish it were possible to show the photographs during this conference in the way that I'm imagining them in my mind. Eventually, I want to print them really wall-sized, like 50 by 70 or so. I had to crop the images down to fit on the screen here, and you can't really get a sense of scale on a Zoom call, but I like to imagine them as filling up this vast space on a wall, because that's what a visionary experience evokes, this immensity and vastness. And that's part of what I'm trying to get across with these photographs. So thank you so much. That's where the series currently is. I look forward to seeing where it's going to continue developing from here. And for anyone who's curious to see where it goes, take a look at my website and social media as well. And thank you so much.